All right, welcome everybody to this month's Intentional Success webinar. This is the viewer's choice. You're going to get to ask me anything, and I'm going to riff and see how much I can think on the fly. This is pretty much limited to business questions. Do not ask me what gear to buy. I don't know. I can tell you how to figure out whether you need to buy gear or not, but that would be a great question. So let's get, let's see what I got to do next. Oh yeah, I'm still me. You know how to reach me. You're here. Check me out on Facebook. We got good stuff happening there. Lots of articles posted on LinkedIn that you might want to take a look at. Quick shout out to the sponsors for Jumpstart Workshops and AV Matters. These are people that help make the cost for doing all the things that I do for free possible. And yes, I do a lot of stuff for free, like webinars, and I appreciate all of you taking advantage of that and using these resources for your betterment. Now, why this particular webinar? Why to answer questions? Well, part of it is I need a break. We had a Jumpstart workshop last week, had a great turnout. We had 105 attendees there, had a wonderful time, lots of good information, lots of good learning, great questions. You know, it's kind of hard to put together a webinar after something like that. But the real reason I'm doing this is I need to get more ideas about what are the things that are on your mind, what's the stuff that will help you work better in your business every day, and your questions give me a good sense, give me a bellwether of what's going on in your world. And a lot of these questions I've answered many, many times before. That's not your fault, but I will be happy to answer them again. I asked, thank you for sending in those questions. So let's just jump right in. I cut and paste the questions that were sent to me, put them on the screen here so that I could see them. This question is about sales management. What have you seen that works or doesn't work for a manager that supervises the sales team? Should this person be industry or a product expert? Do they need to be both? Any other advice? Yeah. Great. And this is a good question. I get this question quite a bit. My answer has kind of evolved over the years, and it will be tailored to according to the size of company you are, what your organizational structure is. Everybody has a slightly different way that they structure sales and operations, and where do project managers fit in and all that kind of good stuff. So that's going to affect things. So the first question that you need to ask if you're looking at sales management is, what's the problem you're trying to solve? I mean, do you just need another six-figure salary, or is there something specific that you need to do that you could have done through the existing management that you have? So that's the first thing I would ask anybody. Make sure that you need to do this. Second is, what's the process that you want to manage? If your sales process is not defined, if you don't have marketing, if you don't have all these other things in place, sales management doesn't have the tools that they need to get you the kinds of results that sales management would normally get. So think about the process you want to manage. Have you defined that process, or are you bringing a sales manager in to define that process? And if all that goes well, what's the outcome? What's the outcome if you manage this process well? So answering those questions, and I'm going to give you a couple of caveats too, and then I'm going to give you two options or scenarios to think about. And I'll think of those as soon as I give you these caveats. Number one, a sales manager is not a salesperson. It's the number one mistake that people make when they hire a sales manager. In small business, we want to be efficient. We want to double dip. If you are not big enough to afford a dedicated sales manager who manages salespeople and sales processes, then you're not big enough to have a sales manager. If you have to have a sales manager who's also your top salesperson, then you don't need a sales manager. You have a different problem, and it's a longer conversation. So managers, in general, managers manage processes, not people. So think about the process you want to manage. So here's a couple of ways to go about it. If you're a smaller company, you're struggling getting your sales team organized or getting them results or getting them to make the calls that they need to make, before you hire a sales manager, think about maybe hiring a sales coach. So a sales coach is going to help you with selling techniques, help you design the incentives, help people with overcome their shortcomings, add to their skill set. And sales coaching is something you can outsource. You can find somebody in your region to come in and do sales coaching with your team, spend some time each week with them, do some one-on-one stuff, help them through sales calls and presentations, that sort of thing. This is great if you already have salespeople who are somewhat professional. And I say that parenthetically because most of us don't. I was a salesperson for years because I was a failed technician. And most of my listeners and my followers, most of our salespeople are people who weren't good at something else. They weren't actually born and bred to be salespeople. They kind of fell into the job. There are exceptions. So sales coaching is great if you have people who are naturally inclined to sales. Sales coaching does not work really well if you have people who are transplants from field work, for instance. They're like me, they're a failed technician. So though they need a different type of support. So option number 2 on sales managers, if you have a technical sales team, that is, if you have a lot of failed technicians who are doing sales, if you grow your own salespeople, then you need somebody from an industry that is process oriented. Now, if we're going to look inside our industry, if you want somebody who speaks the language, look at operations managers. Operations managers manage processes. If they have strategic skills and they have a customer-facing personality, that's a good candidate for putting in charge of a sales process and helping make sure that the salespeople are held accountable to meeting criteria. And then I'll give you a third option. I said 2, but I got 3 options. If you're a big company and you know who you are, if you've got 7 or 8 or more salespeople, then hire a professional sales manager from any industry. And this is an executive team position. This is somebody who should be involved in determining the strategy of your organization. And I don't care what industry they're from. If they've got the background and expertise in sales management, they can manage your budget of salespeople as well as anybody else's. This is a great time to comment. Again, questions go in the Q&A box. If you have a comment or inquiry on the thing I'm talking about right now, try the chat box. Put something in the chat box. I don't normally ask you to use the chat box, but you put something in the chat box, I will see that and I will continue my answer with that context. Next question. I know there's no question mark here, but commission structure for sales reps handling inbound calls. All right, this would be a good one to kind of draw out. So it's not unusual to have a inside sales rep handling inbound calls, and I'm going to call this person a customer service rep or a CSR. You can call them an account manager, you can call them president, I don't care, but the function is they're writing orders for business. So I don't always have a commission structure for that person, but if I were going to have one, if I have an opportunity to increase my utilization of my resources, which is what an inside sales rep would do for you, here's how I might structure it. So I'm just going to start off with a made up number here. I'm going to go, okay, here we got a guy with or a gal with a $40,000 base. Okay, so let's pay him some money, and then let's look at what my expectations for them are. If you're a regional company and you're doing rental work and you've got the $2,000 to $5,000 to $10,000 orders with the occasional $25,000, $30,000, $50,000 job that somebody at a sales desk can handle, then I typically would expect that person to be able to do about $500K a year, depending on the market, up to $700, $750. That's typically what I see. So if they're going to do $500,000 a year, that's typically going to be about $350,000 in gear and $150,000 in labor and expenses. Okay. If I had to sub-rent a bunch of gear, let's call it $50,000 worth of gear. So I've got $300,000 net on the equipment. And then I've got direct labor costs of $125,000 in expenses. All right, so I'm netting about $25,000 on that side of the equation. I would probably commission this person on one rate for the gross profit on gear and another rate for the gross profit on labor and expenses. So if I said that the commission rate on equipment was, let's say 5%, so 5% of the gross profit, then they've got over the course of a year, they've got a $15,000 commission. And if I said it's 10% on the gross profit on the rest of the stuff, then they've got $2,500. So they're going to make $17,500 in commission and incentives on top of their base salary, $57,000. That's about right. It's about 10% of sales for this kind of a role. I don't want all of my sales to cost me 10%, but that first $500,000 is worth about 10% in SG&A salary. So that's how I would probably structure it. Now, you may look at it differently. You may have a different ratio of equipment to labor. You may have a higher margin on labor. Just to adjust the numbers, okay? Remember, you're always incentivizing what you're trying to achieve. If your goal is utilization, I want a high incentive on the equipment. 5% is a very good incentive on the gross profit on equipment because I want to move the gear. And I don't care if they sub-rent. That $50,000 of sub-rental doesn't bother me one bit, if that makes sense, okay? So I got a follow-up question here. When do you need to have an inside salespeople and how many per salesperson? Well, it depends. The questions I would be asking is, who are your target customers and what's your business model? If you're high-end corporate sales and your goal is to do, $200,000 to $1 million shows around the country, then you're probably not focused on inside sales work and rental work and small jobs. But for most of us, we're regional players. We have a regional clientele, and they have a lot of transactions that are fairly easy to navigate and support. I need inside sales for that. So for some of you, you need inside sales from the first dollar you sell. I mean, from the very, very beginning, particularly if the owner of the company is not a salesperson. So certainly by the time you're doing $2 million worth of sales, you probably have at least to have 1 or 2 people doing inside sales if you're doing that kind of work. If you're a $10 million company and you're doing $500,000 in big shows and you have account executives and production managers to deal with that, and you're doing $500,000 worth of incidental rentals, I need 2 or 3 people to sell the top end 500 or $5 million worth of work, but I probably need 5 people or 6 people to sell that bottom, that lower value $5 million. Every job takes as many phone calls and as much time. Doesn't matter what the price of the job is. It's the number of customers and projects you have to manage. So I hope I answered the question for the person who originally asked it. There are a number of other ways to say sales commissions and stuff, but this was about an inbound sales rep handling calls. They're judged by their productivity in terms of how much gear and or people they can move, how much utilization they can increase. All right, let me take the screen back here, and let's take a look at the next question. How are rental rates for AV equipment determined? Well, I can tell you after 35 years, yeah, we just pretty much make it up. But let me find a little bit more satisfying answer for you. So there's a couple of places that rental rates come from. In the old days, rental rates were really based on what did the equipment cost us, because we didn't have markets. If you bought a Barco video projector in a middle market, you're the only company in town that had a Barco projector, and the companies that had Sony projectors had a different rate, and these were apples and oranges. But nowadays, a video projector is a video projector, light comes out of it, and customers are a little bit more agnostic about what it is. So some things to consider. First of all, your value is always market rate plus your value proposition. Okay. So what's the market rate? Well, you compare yourself to the closest competitor. So 20 years ago, we'd go to everybody else's offices and we'd all get our rental brochures, and I'd sit down and have a stack of everybody's rental brochure from my marketplace and say, oh, look, they're getting $300 a day for an LCD projector, but these guys are getting $500. Where do I want to be? So what is my value proposition? Am I worth more? Is my projector worth more than $500 because it comes from me? So that's the market rate approach to this. And in small markets, this still works. Regional businesses, this still works. You can have 10 people in your small market doing this business and be the top dog and charge the most. But once we get out of region, then we start basing our price on the wholesale rate plus our value proposition. So wholesale rate, we didn't, 20 years ago, we really didn't, well, 25 years ago, we really didn't have one, but now with, the types of companies that are out there, all of them seem to have 3 letters in their names. There is a wholesale market out there, and that is the market rate. If you're just renting gear, if you're the gear business, the wholesale rate is the market rate. If you're providing value-added services, wholesale rate doesn't matter because your customer can't buy at the wholesale rate. They're having to buy value-added services. So to the person asking this question, take a look at your marketplace, find out what other people are charging. Is the quality of your equipment and the service that goes with it worth more or less than your competitor? And I should say that market rate is plus or minus your value proposition, because your value proposition might be below market. I mean, that's why you're valuable. There's nothing wrong with selling on price. You can make a lot of money selling on price. And undercutting the market is one way of doing that. So if that's your value proposition, then you're going to come in below market rate. So I hope that answers that question. The next question these are fun, by the way. I'm not going to bother to put this on the screen. You'll get a sense of this as I read it. It says, how do we deal with the flood, all caps, of cheap equipment in the marketplace, only made worse by gear being auctioned off for 2 cents on the dollar by VER, PRG, and others? He talks about he bought 4 15K projectors for $100 each. He saw Sony cameras for $25. It's simply mind-blowing to him. How do you deal with the flow of equipment? Well, first of all, I don't understand what the problem is. If you can buy equipment that you can rent, knock yourself out. And I will tell you the resource that you guys want to look at. If you want to find all this stuff, industrialbid.com. Just go there. A lot of the big corporations, it's not all AV equipment, by the way. You'll have to look through a lot of stuff. But you can go and actually search by VER, PRG and find the auctions that they have set up in there, industrialbid.com, and find some cheap gear. Back in the 90s, we bought a lot of used gear from failed companies because it's the stuff that we had and we needed more. Why not take advantage of it? If cheap gear is affecting your ability, in other words, if it's lowering the market rate in your market, okay, understand that there's nothing you can do about it except adjust your expectations on price. It's a market rate. We can't really change market rate. We can add value and be worth more, but market rate is market rate. We have no control over it. Okay. So don't get caught in that trap. It's just another thing I want to say of worrying about what other people do. If you're an equipment-only rental company, and you can buy cheap gear and lower your prices and compete more, better. That's what rental companies actually do. It's really all about utilization. I have an adjunct question in here. So how many times do you think you need to rent an item to break even? It seems gear we have was paid for years ago and not retired yet. That's a great question, but it's the wrong question. I need to rent the gear an infinite number of times. Now, how many times do I need to rent it to break even? What's break even? I want an ROI on the equipment. So there are things that you're going to buy that you're going to rent them 3 times and pay for them. Other things you're going to rent them 100 times and pay for them. Okay, that's just the nature of the business. You have a mix of inventory. Okay, and I hope you have gear that was paid for years ago and is not retired yet. That's how this works. That flip chart you bought 10 years ago is still a flip chart if it's not beat up, broken, and falling over. So not all gear has to be new in order to be valuable. Now, having said that, I do see more and more old gear in hotels and stuff in particular. I was at an event not too long ago where the there was like no light left coming out of the LCD projector that was hanging in the ceiling. I mean, the thing was a boat anchor. We can do a better job of educating clients, but it's like, you know, sometimes that stuff's going to get to the market. All right, let me, let's get back here and see what we got next. So here's a question about an estimation department. And I know a lot of you don't have estimation departments. If you're putting a budget together, it's probably the salesperson or project manager doing it. So this will be an interesting question for some of you. Where does an estimation department fit in the overall business strategy for an organization? More specifically, where does the estimation department fit into the concept to creation process? This is fun theory. This is stuff I like to talk about. But again, I got to draw you another picture here because sometimes the answers are not self-evident. So estimation is how we figure out what something is worth. So it's putting together a budget. So if I have an RFP come in, if I have an estimating team, then all the RFPs will be treated equally, get the same amount of attention and love, be based on the same pricing parameters, instead of what I affectionately call stupid salesman tricks, where we try and price things, we selectively leave things out or forget to put things in order to get the price down. So it's a way to make something more neutral. An estimating team can't work without some sort of subject matter expert, project management to help them understand how to do things. Your estimating team can't work in a bubble. And if they know how to do everything, they're overqualified to be on the estimating team. So this is a team effort. Budgets and estimates are also affected by creative. So if you've got a creative group or creative design team, that's going to affect the estimate because that's part of this whole sales approach. So let's bring sales into this as well, because sales has the customer relationship and they understand where the customer is trying to go. So the more we talk about this, the more we see that there are lots of people involved in this whole estimation process. If I have creative design, I probably also have some sort of technical design, because it's one thing to know how to creatively come up with a solution. It's a whole other thing to know how to actually make it work. So we often have technical design in there. So that also connects into this whole sales process. And then I need information, I need data, and I get data out of purchasing. Purchasing knows what things cost because that's what they do for a living. They buy things, and those things are recorded in POs, so we have transparency so we can see what's going on, which means my finance team is also involved in helping create this body of knowledge that we have that holds all of this process together. So hopefully that's making sense. Now, if you think about it, in some companies, sales is the estimator. In other companies, project management is the estimator and they work with creative. Sometimes we get this entire team of folks that are together doing this. So I'll have, something that looks like this. Maybe we'll even include the salespeople on some of the meetings. But my point on all of this is that you need a whole team of people to do stuff. Nobody owns it by themselves. We need a lot of transparency of information. And having this many people involved is just an indication of how large the company is. Because the bigger the company, the narrower our job description. And I can't have a 30, 40, 50, $100 million company where I have one person who is the creative designer, the technical designer, the estimator, the purchasing agent, the salesperson, and the project manager. I can be a $1 million company and wear all of those hats and do all of those jobs. So as a company gets bigger, job descriptions get more narrow, but the processes all have to work together as if they were all still inside one person's brain. All right, that was fun. Let's see. Next question here. I'll read the question to you. It says, 50-inch 4K flat screens for $399 and customers are just buying their own for trade shows, etc. All right, surprise. You can go buy a 50-inch flat screen, a really nice one, for $400. So I can't imagine why the customer would resent renting them for $400 a day from you. when it's the exact same product. So yeah, so customers aren't stupid. This is what they're supposed to do. So I understand the context of this question. We have somebody who's frustrated with customers being customers, and that somehow this is not fair. But the problem is that the person asking this question doesn't understand that the value of 50K, the 50-inch 4K flat screen is now about $50 a day. That's the rental rate. That's what it's worth on the open market. $150 a week before you discount it. You know, what we charged for these things 5 to 10 years ago doesn't matter. So if you price it too high, customers are going to go out and buy their own. And this is not unusual. This is not abnormal. This is called owner furnished equipment. So owner furnished equipment is part of what we do, especially in trade shows, especially in trade show booths. They're going to buy their own and truck it from trade show to trade show. So that's normal. So OFE. Now, we still have a huge selling opportunity here. All right. Well, let's face it. Well, let's start off with, you need to mount the silly thing. You need the connectivity, right? You need distribution of signals. And then you need the labor to make this all work, you know, which means you need a certain amount of expertise. Okay. There's still a lot of valuable stuff to sell here. If you think that in 2019, 2020, that you're making money off of consumer televisions, you've missed 2 decades of evolution. You make money off of service. You can sell the service at a much higher price than you are selling it, because what you've been doing is you've been subsidizing. You've been selling the service for less than market value because you've been subsidizing it in the margins you're getting off of the equipment. When you start to realize that the margins you should be getting off equipment are lower than they used to be, and that you have to get higher margins off your labor and your expertise and your services than you did before, then all of a sudden everything kind of evens out. So 10 years ago, if I was renting GAC equipment for a trade show booth, I would probably be, 80% equipment, 20% labor and services and delivery. Today, I should probably be, maybe in the 50 to 60% range. And that means I'm the 40 to 50% range. I need to be charging more for labor and services and a lot less for the gear. I'll make the same amount of money, and I'll quit complaining about what a TV costs at Best Buy, which I think is an unworthy concern for a professional AV company. All right. Yeah, somebody here comments, yeah, they have to store it somewhere and move it around post-show, so paying for ease of, well, that's something you can sell to them. And here's the other thing you can do. You can charge people to store stuff. I've got a client who primarily sells technology into the trade show space. And in the trade show industry, the exhibit company charges a fortune to store a booth until next season. My client does the same thing with the technology that company uses, because the technology doesn't have to be unique to that booth. It can go into a different booth. And so they store it for them and charge them a fee for that, and charge them to get it out, charge them to bring it to the show site, charge them to put it in, take it out, and then store it again. All right. Next question. I'm going to put this one up on the screen. So in our sales operations, our sales team are a combination of inward sales, and that's inside sales for you folks in North America, account management, and production management. And don't apologize, that sounds really normal. What is your thinking on splitting the sales and production function? And then he goes on to explain that the customer works with a sales manager before the contract, and once the contract is signed, it's handed over to a production team to produce. All right, this is surprisingly normal. So I don't have a whole lot of concern about it. But let me help all of us understand the thinking that's going on here. So everything kind of starts with a customer, right? So we got this customer up here. and the customer is paying for something, and let's just call that an outcome down here. The customer is pretty agnostic about how they get there as long as they get there. So what we put in place and those idiosyncrasies that we add to the process either help or hurt you depending on who the customer is and what they're trying to get done. So what might be fairly typical is, so what the customer needs is a proposal or a budget. Again, they don't care who puts it together, but they're going to have to deal with someone. Now, it might be an account manager, it might be a customer service rep, it might be a project manager or production manager. And in the questioner's example, that is somebody who might be a first point of contact or somebody who the job gets handed to. Now, once you've done a job with a customer, they may want to go directly to the project manager because that's who they have developed a relationship instead of the account manager. That's a different set of problems. We know that reality exists. Now, where does the proposal come from? Well, regardless of whether the customer is dealing with any of these three people, you need some sort of management to make sure that that there's efficacy to the proposal. So going back to that earlier drawing about, you know, subject matter experts and estimators and all those people involved in getting the right proposal together, it doesn't matter whether it's an account manager, CSR, or PM that presents the proposal to the customer, as long as that is properly vetted by management in some way, shape, or fashion. Again, what we want is a fairly seamless customer experience. All right. Now, when it comes to execution, most customers will tell you that, with few exceptions, you know, particularly on shows, a project manager is the person that they want to deal with, which means a project manager has to deal with change orders and all that kind of good stuff, which means they have to do a sales function that is part of what their job is. But they are more effective at that sales function if the expectations are set up in front of the project manager. Because to a person, I've not met a project manager that wants to charge the client any extra money. They want to make problems go the way. They want to deliver great service. They want to have a good relationship. And they're generally not inclined to figure out how to charge them for the 2 extra downstage monitors that you had backstage anyway, but now the customer wants them. Or using the extra wireless mics you happen to have in the rack, all of which are viable change orders in most circumstances. So think about how your process actually works, because again, the customer just cares about their needs and the outcomes, and all the rest of this is noise. Make it as noiseless as you can for the customer, and know that you have lots of ways to get the work done. It doesn't matter if you start with inside sales or outside sales or project management. The process you follow is still always exactly the same. All right. Next question. Get off the screen here. Question is, how do the big AV companies acquire so much equipment? Who funds or finances? That is not a naive question at all. I think that's a fantastic question. Matter of fact, I've had variations of that question quite a bit this year. The reason is we have a strong economy. Lots of companies are growing. They need new equipment in order to reduce their costs and continue to grow their businesses and remain scalable. And depending on how you were raised, determines where you think the money comes from. I have some clientele that insist on paying cash for everything, so they accumulate money, then they spend cash. I have some people who use other people's money to grow their business. Both scenarios are correct. There's nothing wrong with either one. It's just a simple choice that you make about how you want to run your business and where you want to put your risk. What's, I think, important to answer this particular question is that if you need to buy gear, if your books say you're sub-renting too much, you have demand, you don't have enough equipment, and so you're having to outsource, and the math says you're better off owning the equipment regardless of how you pay for it, then you will have no trouble getting financing. So you don't have to have the cash, though I do recommend learning to build up a cash fund. You have one easy option, which is for anything you want to buy, there's a leasing company who will fund it for you. You'll place the orders, you'll get the invoices, you hand them to the leasing company, and they will write you a lease, and you start sending them a monthly payment. The criteria for creditworthiness is surprisingly low from leasing companies. Banks take a much harder line at creating loans for this sort of thing. But my goodness, leasing companies will basically fund anything. And the manufacturers are partnering with them to make sure that you have access to leasing companies. So just because you're looking at, you're dealing with a video projector manufacturer who has a leasing option working with another company that's the leasing company so you can buy video projectors, that exact same leasing company would be happy to fund all the other stuff you've bought over the past 3 months. And you can already have bought it and go back and get it leased. You can pay cash for it, go back to the leasing company, set up a lease agreement, get a cash check out of them, and keep your business, your cash flow up. So there's lots and lots of stuff with this, but it's primarily leasing companies. As you get bigger, your bank wants that. So as you're more reliable, if you have a lot of cash on your balance sheet, if you keep a large fund, to take care of slow times, banks are very willing to loan money and consolidate loans. Matter of fact, you get a couple of leases out there, go to your bank, the bank will fund that, create a loan for that because you've shown a history of paying it back. You can consolidate that. And then your challenge is to pay it all off as quickly as you can. So leasing is just a way of kicking the can down the road. You can get a lease for 5 or 8 or even 10 years on equipment. Be careful. If that equipment's only got a 3-year life, you just made a really, really bad mistake. And I can tell you some horror stories about companies that overextended themselves on leases, one of which is a large 3-letter company, which is now selling their stuff at auction. So I got nothing to draw on that one, so let's go on to the next one. Thank you for people who are submitting Q&A. I want to try and get to more of those. This is the last pre-submitted one. It's a complaint about PSAV. I put this in here because I hate this question. I think this is a very unhelpful question. It's like PSAV is PSAV. They have a market share. They've learned how to control some market, and quit complaining about it because this is what is normal. This is your new normal, and you have to figure out how to deal with it. Now, I've never heard of them locking out rigging and internet at every property. I know for a fact that is not true because I do work in PSAV properties all the time, and they let me bring in my own outside suppliers for small jobs. So that blanket statement, again, it's an absolute. Anytime somebody makes an absolute black and white statement about this, especially about business, especially about competition, they're venting about something else. So this is, I'm sorry this person feels out of control. It is frustrating, but there's a solution here. Same answer I've given for 20 years. Number one, we have to educate event planners. MPI is doing a real good job of that. The organizations that support event planners, lots of our colleagues in the industry are educating event planners about the stuff they can cross out on contracts, how to shop for other venues, how to negotiate better so that they are not in a corner. Wi-Fi. Why are we having the internet discussion? All of you have access to a Wi-Fi solution that you can bring in without even touching infrastructure. You can come in and do cellular network Wi-Fi systems that'll serve 500 people. Why aren't you looking into that? Why aren't you putting that on there? If the hotel is going to charge your client $15,000 for internet for not using their in-house AV, why don't you go out and spend $1,500 on internet and give it to them for free and it's your gig? So again, come up with a solution, look at what's going on in the marketplace, quit trying to wish it to go away, do something about it. Second point, marketing. You should be the company that planners call before they book a venue. And if you're not, work on your marketing. There are planners who work with companies like yours that will talk to you before they book a venue. And then the third part of my answer to this, and I'm venting a little bit because I said this is a very frustrating topic to still be talking about. Basically, this question has existed with one company or another for the 35 years I've been in business. And the answer has always been the same. There are millions of events out there that aren't affected by this issue. So build a bigger sales pipeline. There's no substitute for marketing in this day and age. Okay? If you've got a customer who's locked themselves into a bad situation with the hotel third-party provider AV company, go find another client. Just keep moving. And it may not be the answer you want to hear, but it's a big world out there. There's a lot of business out there. There's a lot of people who have never been contacted by any of you. And I've met them and I've talked to them. I mean, these are event planners handing millions of dollars worth of business, and none of you have ever found them or reached out to them. So look at your marketplace, look at your marketing, and do something about it. There. All right. Let me get off my rant. I'm going to go to some questions here that you guys are putting in on. Oh, let me finish up on this last thing. I've got one comment here about how about PSAV quoting rigging, weight limits different to clients and outside AV. We need twice as many points as in-house. Again, if they don't want the outside company coming in, quit acting like an outside company, act like the client. So the situation I think you're describing is PSAV says, oh, the rig points are, if they're telling the event planner the rig points are 2,000 pounds a piece, but they're telling you who submitted your drawings for the event that they're only 500 a piece, so you're gonna have to get twice as many points. Call bullshit. That's simply go back to your client, say, here's the situation. Your event's about to get charged an extra $5,000 for rigging because the in-house company is being disingenuous. So let's get this reconciled and just be professional about it. So there's a business solution to most all of these situations. All right, back over to Q&A here. I should be able to get a few of these in. What costs do you associate with a rental item versus the sales of the item? What costs do you associate with a rental item versus the sales of the item? I'm not quite sure how to answer that or what you're really asking, but let me give you a basic. Oh, here we go. Example: $300 for the sale of a monitor, 50% cost, $150. We use 50% cost versus sales price to cover the overhead items, repairs. Is there a formula that's commonly used? Okay, so I think the question here is really about burden. What's the overhead burden we associate with a rental item versus the sales of an item? This is another one of those it's the wrong question things. Many of you know that the whole idea of burden and assigning SG&A or below the line burden to a cost of goods sold, I think is completely illogical. It's anathema, but it's an indication of owners and finance people and accountants trying to figure out how to control something they don't understand, which is a rental value that seems to be completely made up. That's not something that I can completely get into in a webinar like this. This is the kind of thing that we talk about at the Jumpstart Management Workshop, and we talk about the metrics of this, and we talk about job cost analysis and how we look at the price of things. For instance, if I buy a monitor for $300 and I'm going to sell it, I need to put a margin on that. So my cost is $300. If my cost is $300 and I want to make a 25% margin, I have to mark it up 33%, right? So, 25% gross profit is the same as a 33% markup. So this comes down to understanding the difference between margin and markup. 25% gross profit is your margin, but it takes 33% markup to do that. For some reason, we're deathly afraid of markup numbers, and so we keep pushing our markup down on stuff. And people say, well, we marked it up 20%. Well, if you marked it up 20%, gosh, that's 17% gross profit. I mean, none of us can survive on 70% gross profit. So a 20% markup is an insult. That barely pays for the cost of processing the invoice. So have a better relationship with numbers, and I think that your question will start to answer itself. Moving on, I've got a question here about existing long-term client. They recently now created a new procurement department, yay, and has upset the dance with regards to creative and proposal processes. Now it's all about money. Any advice? Yeah, marketing. So business development is part of marketing. Business development's job is to get you to the economic buyer, which is generally above procurement in the organization. Procurement is doing their job. So keep that in mind as well. So sometimes what procurement's job is to break these relationships between the buyer and the supplier that are built on two people. It's those bow tie relationships that we developed. where we're going to our favorite vendor and we're not really negotiating well, we're not looking at comparables and that sort of thing. So procurement's job is to break that. So if you're suddenly surprised that that is happening, then you're not paying attention to what's going on with your customer, you're not anticipating that, but you can regroup and come back and say, okay, we need to establish our role and we need to separate the creative and proposal processes from the execution process and make that a different transaction. So I can sell creative and help them, my client, design the creative for their job, which then goes out to bid, and then I will bid on it through procurement, just like any other supplier. But I don't have to be the lowest bidder because procurement generally does not hire the lowest bidder. That's not their task. Their task is to make sure that there's transparency to the process and it's well vetted. So adjust your expectations, add the elements that will make it work for procurement, and keep going after the business. You know, a lot of these questions have to do with regret over the fact that the status quo is no longer the status quo. Business changes and we need to make adjustments for that. Yeah, we got a little bit more time here. Is it typical to split the sales manager and marketing manager role? Yeah, sure. But in a small company, they might be the same person. However, I've not met a sales manager who knows anything about marketing, and I don't know a lot of marketing managers that know much about sales management, but sometimes we find those people in that role or sharing that title. It's like, you know, having a director of business development who's also a sales manager. I mean, these things don't really go together. Imagine your top audio engineer also being the IT guy. You know, it's the same sort of thing. So it's pretty rare to have them together. So depending on the size of your company, remember, the bigger you get, the more employees you have and the narrower their job description. So if I'm a 20-person company, which is about the time I need a sales manager, that person might also initially be the marketing manager, but by the time they're 30 people, I probably have somebody in the marketing manager or at least the marketing coordination role. I've got a chart that I shared at the Jumpstart Operations Workshop that's in that workbook, and I'll be going over it in greater detail at the management workshop that talks about the staffing levels and the positions that you need depending on the size of your company and your institutional development. So that's something we'll get into more in a workshop environment. We can get into that much more deeply. All right, let me take the screen back here. And I've got a few more things I want to go over with you before I let you go because we're a little bit out of time. All right. Quick sales pitch. Introductory phone call. I see a lot of names on here of folks I don't really know. I've not worked with you or talked to you. I may not have even seen you at a workshop where we see hundreds of new people every year. If you want to know more about how to work with me, whether we're a good fit, here's how you do it. You go to my website, you can use the contact me link. It'll take you to this link here, which is the TR Simpson/introduction. Set up an appointment and let's have a quick 25-minute conversation and introduce ourselves to each other. If we seem like a good fit, then we'll set up another call where we can talk more about the services I provide and how they affect your business, and we'll do a strategy session so that we can have that conversation. But there's nothing wrong with, there's no sales pitch on this call. Let's just learn a little bit about each other. I might give you some quick help on whatever problem you're dealing with, or show you how to find solutions for that by attending my webinars, workshops, or even what article you might want to go back and look at. So I love these conversations. I'm happy to have them. You cannot bother me on making an appointment to talk about your business. It's kind of like what I do. Next month's webinar, I'm calling it The Buck Stops Suddenly, Your Guide to Intentional Management. So what we're going to talk about is some of the things that owners and managers need to know in order to grow their business, to make money, have fun, and do all of that at the same time. This is about holding yourself accountable as a manager. not about holding employees accountable, because it doesn't work until you've done it to yourself. And we're going to help you take what you know and put it to some better use. So I think this is good for all management, wherever you are inside of your organization in terms of management, to learn more about what your role is and how it all works. So that's next month's webinar. Sign up for that. Remember, you have to sign up in order to get access to the archive. And then November 11th through 13th is the next Jumpstart workshop. It is a management. We're calling it Management Intentional Success. We'll talk about vision. We'll talk about leadership, values, people, money. I've got some great guest presenters. We'll talk about how you decide where your organization is going, how you measure performance, what are KPIs that matter to you and your company, how to deal with the whole budgeting thing for your organization, how to make decisions, how to deal with the growing pains and stuff. So these are fantastic topics to work through in a team scenario, and a team workshop. If you haven't been to a Jumpstart workshop, we get folks and we get a few individuals who come on behalf of their company, but we have a lot of companies that have 2, 3, 6, 7, 8 people in attendance, so they can all learn this stuff together and start applying it right away. So watch your email for that. You're on the mailing list. You're going to get the email. You won't miss finding out about it, but August 31st is when the registration for that starts. Again, quick shout out to the sponsors. Thank you guys so much. I got some final thoughts, but I'm going to scan here, see if we've had any other questions sneak in. And I did have one more question, and we've got time, so I'm going to go ahead and answer it. The question is, there's more and more pushback on trucking costs lately. The quote, "We can just find a local provider," is heard more and more. Is the solution to hide those costs, maybe partner up with regional providers near the venue with all the why wouldn't they just call them next time concerns? Okay, yeah. So yeah, this is another market reality. The cost of trucking is not going to go down. Trust me, it's not going to go down. It costs $10,000 to send a tractor trailer from Dallas to Vegas round trip. There's nothing we can do about that. But what we can do is take a look at how we're presenting it to our customers. So if you're giving your customers, do you put on your proposals rent, the cost of rent of your business? We give much too much detail when we write a proposal. It's not the customer's concern how you get the gear there. Now, if you're moving the customer's equipment, that's a quotable thing. But why should the customer be concerned with what it costs to get your equipment there? Why are we adding that noise? So absolutely, yeah, of course you hide it. It's the cost of doing business. It is a cost against the job, but I don't show the client every one of my costs. I just show them the value of the outcome that they're paying for. So again, that's another long question, but make sure your team understands that if there's pushback on trucking pricing and it's visible in your proposal, the problem is not the price of the trucking. The problem is the visibility in your proposal. You need some help on how to write a proposal that sells value, that sells the what you're doing for customers instead of selling the how you do things. Anybody can sell how. Okay? Yes, Aaron, it is that expensive for normal people. So thank you guys for the comments. Thanks for the chat and everybody. I really enjoyed this. I will try and do one of these at least a quarter. And find out more about what's on your mind. So thank you very much for this. And I guess what you need to do now is go get back to work. And I'll get you an email tomorrow that shows you where you can look at the recording, share with folks, go back and find the answers that you need that you were looking at your email when I was answering them. So thank you, everybody. Cheers. Have a good one.